You're welcome along to the Maroon and White pod. This evening I'm joined by Maurice Brosnan and we're taking a look at all things Galway football between post-primary, Sigerson football and the goings on in the Galway senior football panel, who's involved and who's not at the minute. And obviously they're preparing for Saturday week, the opening round of the league against Armagh, and a lot of supporters probably already hoping for a bit of revenge. Before we get into that, Morris, it was just interesting. I was reading the Doom Herald there. Jarlath and Clare Galway over this week. It was an interesting game, obviously. A draw or a Clare Galway victory would have got them through. Jarlath had to win and they beat Clare Galway by 1 point to go through to the Connacht semi-final.
Well, I feel like I'm every couple of years I'm talking to you about a heartbreaking loss for Clare Galway at some level and the predator that's coming, but like it's a kind of a curious thing in one sense, and then in another sense it's just reflective of this grade of football, which is very, very hard to predict. And like if I told you before this competition that Jarrett's going to kick off against the Leitrim Amalgamation with a loss, you probably would say, "Geez, what does this mean?" So I think that it's more a reflection on the state of play, basically. Maybe we'll talk about it later. Probably it was an interesting choice by school competitions, and I get it no more than I get it in third level competitions to stick with the old rules. But I think it would have been interesting to see, and the interest definitely would have ramped up if they had adopted something slightly different. But look, like by and large, I think this grade is great. I On the point about the makeup of the competition, I actually like the fact that you've got a Leitrim amalgamation in there. I think it, from a kind of football perspective, it's something that we should be encouraged by. I think there's a couple of very handy schools coming down the tracks here as well, which all bodes well. So, hard to speak about the game itself, and I didn't see it, but as a competition, I like it, and I think there's the scope there for it to be a really good pathway for developing players at that rate.
Particularly with Jarlath, I was chatting to a few people who were at the game. They were saying they were in control for most of the game, but then up to the last 5 minutes, Clare Galway came with a late comeback, lost by a point in the end, and did have chances to equalise that game, which would have obviously got them through. You talk about there, and from talking to different people, this seems to be the most open Connacht post-primary championship in a long time.
It does, but I think this has been coming. If you've watched, uh, a couple of you would have looked at, um, provisional or club football in other counties, and I think there was an attitude in Galway of not looking down on them, but definitely that they would have viewed them as a step or two ahead. And then you've seen what's come on at Claremore or Ballinrobe and Mayo. You've seen a couple of these teams who've really started to come to the fore now, and I think that day is done. So I don't think from an open perspective, it's great. I don't think it's a surprise though. I genuinely don't. Like I think if this is becoming on the tracks a long time, no more than you've seen, like, and you can see it in Jarlath too. There's some very good. There's a junior team there. Jack Rugan is actually involved in them, who look pretty handy as well. So there is definitely more to come. But I don't. I agree with you. It is very open, but I don't think that was necessarily a shock.
It's interesting in one sense if so Jarlath play Summerhill, Leitrim combined schools play Comans in the other semi-final. Interesting here if Jarlath win and Leitrim win, Jarlath automatically go through to the All-Ireland series.
Yeah, no, to be honest, I do I like the idea of amalgamations is great, but I do also see the point in that as well. No more than you've got a situation when you've got second or third junior clubs going into junior championships, but they're not going to go on and represent in Connacht. I only think it's fair enough, to be honest. And like, what's the point? Why do we have amalgamations in these competitions? Is it for them to be successful, or is it for them to develop a cohort of players? If it's the latter, whether it be a Waterford amalgamation, the Cornamia and Munster, or a Leitrim amalgamation in Connacht, if the whole point is trying to develop those players and expose them to this level, then that's the box of sticks, like mission accomplished. You don't necessarily need them to go on to compete in All Ireland, and that in itself probably would be a stretch too far. So I have no issue with that either, to be honest.
I've had a lot of people on to me about the Jarlath team and who was involved, and I was telling them Shane McGlinchey's there, and the surprise on a lot of people's faces when you tell people that this man is still playing senior schools football.
Yeah, I mean, just people watching them play for two last year. Is like, is this fella actually in fifth year? Like that's it's kind of a difficult thing to wrap your heads around. I think it's to be fair to Shay, you don't want to overburden any sort of expectation on him or whatsoever. I know he's a really screwed in fella, and like would have a very keen understanding of where he is as a player anyway. But I like. you kind of have an overarching philosophy of lads at that grade. Can they play as much football as possible and can they be exposed to different grades as possible? And when you look at a guy like Shea, who was involved in a Galway under 20 team last year, uh, Jarlath's run last year, a Tuam under 19s run, a Tuam seniors run, now involved with the Tuam seniors as well. He's obviously going to be 20s again. The only thing is that you want him, as long as everybody is fair and there's a lot of communication, and in fairness, that seems to be the case, that, he obviously had a kind of high publicized knee injury last year that took a bit of minding. So, and from that perspective, you don't want to overburden him. But I think that level of development can just do nothing but wonders for a fellow like that. So, yeah, I think it's great. Like it's great to see that he's tuned to the bone. Like that's there's no doubt about that. So the fact that he's kicking on with Jared is kicking on with the 20s, had like for a debut season to come in and make do as well as he did in midfield last year, and now the exposure that he's going to get from a Galway senior panel will only stand him as well. So all of that bodes well.
I know we were talking, he's obviously involved on the Go senior football panel at the minute. And we've seen this with Pork. He's brought in players quite young and likes to get them in around the group for their own development.
Yeah, and I think that's you hit the nail on the head there. Development, like that's what it's about. So this could be a long-term project. And in fairness to Park, like you're right, there are definitely you could not accuse him of not having of being short-term with this sort of stuff. Like he is absolutely conscious of blooding young players, of what it'll do to them to be exposed to the group, of serving your now you do have to serve an apprenticeship, like there's a part of it, and that's a difficult thing for some lads. And you see a lot of lads in that like the 30 to 40 bracket, like just outside of even outside of an A versus B if everybody's fit. And it's very, very hard. I would actually argue borderline impossible to hold on to those boys. So you see a lot of that. There's a cohort of like 5 to 10 which turn over every couple of years, and it's I think it's inevitable. Like it's very hard for those lads to give the commitment, very hard for management to hold on to them. So that's the consequence of it. But by and large, I think this is a good thing. Like, there's a couple of Shay and a couple of the June boys were involved in they played Wicklow in a development squad game last weekend. And that's you're playing against intercounty players there. You're playing in Tuam Stadium. That's all that is going to stand to you as well. So I think Park has been very and Galway as management as a whole have been very good about that. And the way they used the development squad last year, I actually think was an encouraging thing. And a couple of years ago, that would have been treated like as a borderline as a joke. Like there was lads who had zero interest in taking a call or going in there. Like, there was a stage when Kevin Walsh, I think, was contacting over 60 players. Like at one stage, he wrote in his book he'd over 40 no's. So when you think about that to where Galway as a whole is at now, that's a major positive, and credit has to go to management for that.
Just before we touch on some of the recent challenge matches, you've been involved in the Sigerson and you've been around to different games so far. Overall, across the board, what have you made as standard Sigerson this year?
Varied, to be honest. Like, yeah, peaks and I think the competition is extremely open this year, but I think the gap between the top and the bottom is significant, is extremely significant. And to be honest, I'll go back and talk this up, and maybe I'll prove myself wrong in a week or two's time. But I don't remember as many hammerings in the first 2 rounds as we've seen at this stage before, and that's not in any competition. That's not good. Like it just isn't a positive thing. So the quality at the top end of the competition is still like ultra competitive, and in some cases ferocious. I was in Abbottstown last night for UL against Ulster University, defending champions, and it was just a really clinical, really efficient game. A game that a lot of people are happy to see we're moving away from. You could argue in terms of how controlled it was, but I just thought it was a really competitive um, contest. That definitely a couple of other games I've seen. That like I looked at ATU Galway on paper. I had really high hopes for that group. Actually, to be
Yeah.
honest, like to see it and they lost both of their games. They only lost by a point now last night, but to lose both of their games is pretty disappointing. Like I mean, when you look at them on paper, like they have got some really
By
talented
all
footballers
by
there.
all accounts, going really well in challenge matches before Christmas. So
Yeah, like they played Carrow, they played NUIG a couple of times and had some right good battles with them. And like Em McGrath, and anybody watching Go 20s last year would have seen how good he is as a goalkeeper. You've got Paul Kelly in midfield, who it's been a Sigerson star. Like what he's done in this competition in the last couple of years. Shane McGinley, half the country was talking about him last year for what he did for Roscommon under 20s. Jack Mullen, if he was there was one forward who lit up the Connacht final, the under 20 final I'm talking about here last year. The other one was Jack Mullen on the other side. Both of them were in the team together. Nathan Granger played that day. So like they have got some really a lot of very good players, but it just didn't happen, unfortunately, and they're out now. So yeah, like that was, and it's you can go from, you look at NUIG or University of Galway, who can go from losing a game by 3 points to an absolute tanking a week later, and it's kind of a funny nature of the competition. But it's a very long-winded way of answering your question. I think that the top end of it is still very competitive. I actually think the next couple of games, starting from next Tuesday and Wednesday, there'll be some absolutely classics there. But how thin that lower thing is, you don't want to overreact to it. But if that becomes a trend, you would start to have slight worries about that, all right?
Yeah, so ATU Galway lost last night in round two. They were put into the losers round after being defeated by UL in round one. So anyone who loses in the losers round in round two is out. But just looking at the ATU Galway scores last night, Nathan Granger won four, Owen Mannion 4 points, Dara Walsh 4 points, Dara Hegarty 1 point. All Galway scores there, and you're looking at the scores like that. That's why I suppose when you look at those players in particular who scored, there was a bit more expectation there for them this year.
And Kevin, Darrell Walsh actually was missed the first round. He was away skiing, I think, so he didn't play that day. And O'Manion was actually probably their best forward uh, in the first round as well. So yeah, like, there's no surprise there. And there's a couple of other lads like I still my my point still stands when you look at their squad. I actually got a glimpse of their freshers team today, and there's a couple of lads there who you're looking at and saying these lads have played senior. Mark Mannion, for example, have played senior football. Like lads who have been proven. You've got a couple of the twenties, the Galway twenties who were there last year, like Keane Murphy is there and Shane Canavan, guys like this who are going to start to come along as well. So I think they're not in the camp of teams that I would be concerned about, to be honest. Move like if you look ahead to the years or this the Gulf that I'm talking about, I think they've when you look at the talent that's there, there's more than enough that they'll be ultra competitive this time next year.
Then on University of Galway, were beaten by TUD in the first round. Bet Queens last night, 4-15 to 4 points. That's some response by University of Galway.
It is, and absolutely it is. Now that is a right good TUD team. Like, geez, they are, and they have been for a couple of years now. Actually, I don't. The first round last year was a shock, like a technical bookies shock. I don't think anybody was that surprised when they saw that result from the open round this year. A lot of the same lads who were involved in that team. I remember Sean Hannafin had a Trojan game last year against Galway, and to see him back again this year, and a couple of very talented midfielders alongside him now, in Keane McBride and the likes. So I wasn't one bit surprised to see that result. From a Galway perspective, part of this is explainable by you just naturally get stronger. Your squad gets Brian Dunn, who doesn't play in the first round, does play in the second round. That's an all-star nominee coming into your forward line. It's inevitable that he's going to get thing. Keane Hearn scored 2 goals last night, and
Yeah.
I think he's primed to have a really, really exciting year, and was pretty close to it last year until that heartbreaker of an injury before the All-Ireland semi-final. So I wasn't too surprised at that. I'd say that's you've got Galway's an interesting case study in that you've got an incredibly long-serving management, and the same lads who've been on the line for a long time there. They some of them are actually involved in freshers football, so they know this group inside out. They would have, I think, if I'm right in thinking, I'd say a few of that, maybe the Mayo core, the likes of John McGonigal, would they have been there with the Mayo 20s when Morris was there as well? So he would know that group extremely well. They've got, like, on paper, they are a star-studded team. What a draw to end up against UL now next week as well, which kind of surprised that actually wasn't the game that they picked to stream.
Yeah,
Um,
same as.
but yeah, look, again, no more than when you saw that first round result roll in, I wasn't surprised. I actually wasn't surprised to see the nature of last night either. You kind of know that they have the talent to do that to a team if they get a run.
Just from looking at the starting 15 for University of Galway, isn't it the perfect team for a Sean Hansberry and a Brian Cogger to be involved in from the gap to say club to eventually break it on to the intercounty team?
And see that, yeah, 1,000,000%. And that's the primary purpose of this, not the primary purpose, but that is a huge benefit of this grade, is that it's such a perfect bridging ground between like high quality underage football and top tier senior football. And so I think some intercounty managers see it for that and are very keen to let their lads in there and what that will do to them. Uh, Others, as has been much discussed recently, are not. But from I look at guys like I even look at a guy like James McLaughlin and a chance now to really make this team your own and mix, rub shoulders with top intercounty players who are going to come up against in higher stakes competitions later down the line and prove that that's where you belong. So that's the nature of the grade. A guy like Killian O'Curry, who I think probably was looking for a small bit of form, didn't necessarily happen from a club perspective last year. Started off really brightly with Galway, and then obviously as lads came back was less involved. So for someone like that to start to catch fire and just to the radar is in, and that would I think definitely carry into a league campaign where you'd expect them to get some minutes as well. So yeah, that's a big benefit of this competition is that you are watching lads who are the confidence they will take for this will absolutely prime them hopefully to have significant impacts for their county.
Yeah, so on the Galway representatives in the University of Galway team, you have James Egan from St. James's in goal. Keane Hernan scored 2-1 fullback. Colin Murray from Montbellion My Law, cornerback and captain of the team. Jack O'Neill, wing back, scored a point. Sean Hansberry and James McLaughlin midfield. And then Michael Mahan of McCullen, Matthew Thompson, saw Tinnock Nacara, 4 points. Liam O'Connell at 1 point, and Killian O'Carroll 1-1. And Brian Collier started in the corner, but it drifts out in that role. Um, and you had Shane McGrath from Dunmore McHale's, who came on as well for
Sam is knocking
University.
around there as well. Sam O'Neill is in college there as well, obviously. So he
Yeah.
was a guy like that. I think is another one who you might expect to see later on in the competition.
How do you plan to beat your clubmate next week?
Very sad. It's very difficult. I have to say, like I think I said it to you at the time. Like I was kind of gutted for Keane last year. Like like Paul Keane came back in ridiculous nick from
Yeah.
North Carolina. Like I mean ridiculous nick.
I
Like
don't think anyone will come back like that from an Erasmus. Like,
yeah, like to test the way he was testing after coming back is no small thing. So I think again going back to it, management deserve a lot of credit for giving him the leeway to go on Erasmus and then come back into the group when he was able to come back into the group. I also think Keane deserves credit for not taking the piss with that. For he
yeah.
was in regular contact with Park while he was away. He was sending him various sessions. He made his mark immediately when he came back. Like I think he was back. He was I actually met him. He was wandering around on the pitch celebrating after the Connacht final to when Galway bet Mayo last year. And what was it? A week or two later, he's starting against Westmeath in Cusack Park as a forward, and then suddenly he's been converted into a full back. Like he was a complete pocket knife for that team, and then had a super game against Dublin, and I think was in contention to nab a place there against Donegal, and then it's just a really tricky injury that comes and messes him up for his club campaign as well, which was very frustrating as well, I have to say. So I I, I was kind of I think in a weird way Keane is due a bit of luck, and I'm not surprised to see that him start the year the way he did. I'm not surprised to see how good he was against Kildare in the challenge game for Galway, and playing in this kind of it's not a role. I think a lot of people would associate Keane growing up as they would have known him from that 20s team as being this run and gun in midfielder who has a bit of everything, but technically, like as in a one-on-one defender, he's class. Like very difficult guy to get past. Is it capable of doing a man marking job? So I can see why Galway are like, okay, maybe there's something as a fullback here. And then you read last night that he scored 2 goals from fullback, and think, okay, maybe it's not just defensively why he's back there either. So look, I mean, it's not an easy thing. I think from a Galway perspective, it's really encouraging to see a couple of lads in that camp for me actually. Like Keane Hernan was in that camp. Sam O'Neill was in that camp. I right up until that quarter final when he did his knee for James's. Sam looked primed to have he finished the 20s campaign, had been called in with Galway, by all accounts said was holding his own, and then has a really tricky injury and just setback after setback. Like he was supposed to, that kind of final I just mentioned, he was supposed to win the squad, and I think on the Thursday night he broke down in training and it's swelled up again. So that I mean that was just cruel, really. So another guy who could, I think, deserves a run and a break. And it looks very early days. I'm talking on the 16th of January here, but by all accounts, it looks like they're going to get it.
Yeah, it seems to be Keane, Sam, and James that you would probably expect to they're going to get opportunities in the league to break onto this because even if you look at James McLaughlin too, he hasn't had much luck either with injuries.
He hasn't. And, another guy who kind of did it a different way, I suppose, in that went on his Erasmus, and then was commuting back over and back for my Cullen during the year last year. And that's why got a clean run of club games, and hopefully now we'll get a clean run of Sigerson games, and he could build on that as a league campaign going down the track. And I do think Galway are in a we're all somewhere in the dark here, and the new rules is the apostrophe that's hanging over everything that we talk about here, or the asterisk that's hanging over everything. But I think of a guy like James McLaughlin, I think, okay, there is definitely scope to see. We Galway are looking at this and thinking we like to go long in our kick out anyway, and we're going to have to go longer again because of the nature of the new kick out rules. And you've got a monster in midfield. Why not expose him to that and see if he's able to shoulder that? And so I think Galway will actually. I wouldn't be surprised if they end up with one of the highest players used in the league. I think there's a couple of guys we haven't seen yet who will get a chance in the league, and that I think is a good thing. This is the nature of where they're at. We're starting to realise the incredible precedence and the huge importance that was being placed on being in Division One might not necessarily be the same. The fixtures aren't that unkind to Galway. I certainly not as unkind as I thought they fell last year. So you boil all that down, and I think, yeah, I could see scope for a lot of those lads getting a right good chance over coming weeks.
You're involved with UL in the background this year. Is Jack McCabe, is he the only goal representative?
Yeah, Jack is there and scored 1-1 last night. Yeah, 1-1 last night. Yeah, came on in after a couple of minutes for an injury. And as a I mean, Jack is a funny study for me. Like I think Jack has bags of potential and is like a really talented inside forward. But there's kind of a curious thing where lads like that need, I suppose, from a Galway perspective, like this grade again. Like I know I'm repeating my point here, and I'm trying to make it a different way to say that. But this grade will really stand to players like that who have got a really good club campaign, can develop something with a Sigerson competition. So yeah, Jack is in there, and a couple of kind of, I would say you will have a lot of like underrated is not the word. Maybe not lesser known, but really, really quality. I mean, like high end players in this group. Like there's do not sleep on the talent that's in there. They're a right good team as they showed last night. And Jack's at the forefront of that and is like a real kind of uh, focal point of what they do in attack.
That's your way of saying UL are going to upset the odds on Tuesday?
Far, far from it. I think a team like UL are kind of there's something kind of nice about Sigerson where you're seeing lads who I think laterally people will start to realize, okay, these are lesser known players, and you've seen that elsewhere. Like there's guys who first come across my radar as what they could do at in the Sigerson Cup, and then you start to realize, like guys like Barry McNulty or Paul Kenny from Leitrim, like for a lot of people who love the competition and are keen to see how guys do on this platform, you start to realize just the potential that's there. And I think that's part of the thing that is most encouraging about the competition is that they give lads that platform. Like it still is, and I mean I know this. I've worked in the industry and now I've seen it from a different perspective this year. But there's like the appeal of it is still limited. Like there's not crazy interest, and people are coming to games. The people who are in it really really like it. JI diehards really really like it, but it doesn't have like national spotlight on it.
Yeah.
And so in those kind of that what makes it such a great bridging point. That the stakes aren't colossal where they might crush a fella, but they are still very very considerable, and the football is still very quality. So it's just as a perfect. I think managers who realize that and get to use it for that scope is a good thing. And then there's other lads who aren't part of intercounty panels, just like really quality club players, and what they would like being exposed to this and what they'll bring back to their own clubs. So like on this Galway team, Conor Heenan from Tuam is in with UL as well
Conor
this year,
Heaney, yeah, of
and he's
course. Yeah.
in. Connor's Conor was under 20 last year, like, he's a very young player, but Conor played Sigerson. Like Conor came on against
Yeah.
ATU Galway and really held his own. And what if that's to get that sort of development at this age is brilliant. Like what to be exposed to top tier intercounty players and have coming off a really good 20s campaign and had a good impact for Hume last year as well. Like that's what you want the grade to be. That's so if you can get, I think there's obviously there's a bit of honor and kind of I don't know it's something nice from a club's perspective when you're looking down and you see your lads involved. But more broadly than that, there is just a bit of uh, a bit of a buzz that comes around the player being involved in there and what it could hopefully do for them. So From that perspective, it's part of the reason why I love the competition is that you can see a guy. I remember a couple of years ago watching us University and Peter Og McCartan, the wing back, came up and kicked an absolute screamer against TUD. So it was no surprise to me then when you see him do it against Kilcoo and win an Ulster final, and then against Crokes and break their hearts in a All Ireland club semi final last weekend. Like, because you kind of know, okay, he has credit in the bank. I know that he has that in his locker. I've seen him do it. Maybe you can say, argue about the difference in the grades here, but it was pretty damn close to the same, and I've seen him do it. So, from that perspective, it kind of bode well.
TUS Midlands have probably been the biggest surprise this year. They're straight into the quarter final. Sean Kelly from Montpellier Milan midfield on that team, and Jack Dowd from Annadown on the team as well. They're the Galway representatives, but they've definitely been the biggest surprise in the Sigerson Cup so far. On to what's happening with the Galway senior footballers at the minute. Obviously, a lot of challenge matches, two in particular last Saturday against Meath and Wicklow. From what we're hearing with these challenge matches, there's obviously a lot of talk about them, but from last Saturday in particular, what have you heard from those Meath and Wicklow games?
Like, I suppose it's kind of it's a really weird time in the year in that there's always a bit of interest in challenge games, and you might hear kind of an odd result up and down the country, but with the new rules, there seems to be an added degree of interest in it, and without the preseason competition, so you've kind of got the perfect marriage, which has made maximize the interest, and they still are, they still are what they are. Like, they still are challenge games. In certain cases, they're challenge games against development squads, and like Galway were playing Meath last weekend, the same time a Meath development squad are playing Kerry. So I think, other than Dahi McGowan, I don't think that Meath team that played against Kerry had anybody very strong because they were away playing Galway. In which case, what stock do you put in much of it really? And I think that's the case. A lot of across the county, you kind of got like kind of mixes of development squads. I know there's a bit of talk about the Carlow Kildare challenge game at the weekend because the Carlow goalkeeper passed the ball to himself from the kick out, but from what I understand, that was a Kildare development squad. Kildare were actually away playing a different game in the Downs at the same time. So that's just the nature of what's going on this year. From a Galway perspective, I think maybe it isn't as official as it was the last couple of years because there's no FBD league and you're not seeing wholesale panelists, but very similar thing to what they've done with a development squad and a senior squad. So a lot of lads being exposed to both, and what that'll do to them. I just mentioned Conor Heenan there. His brother Dara played against Wicklow at the weekend there, kicked a corker of a point. So what it'll do for lads like that is very encouraging, I think. So as a competition, I suppose, or what, not as even as a competition, as a structure, what they're doing is getting minutes into as many lads as possible, casting their net far and wide. You would hope to see a couple of those lads filter through to league campaign, or maybe some of them who are like maybe carrying a couple of knocks or stuff at the minute, then might get their chance as the league advances. But I think Galway have used it really well, like really, really well. Down to something as simple as like you've got a league opener against Armagh under lights on a Saturday night, so play another challenge game in the exact same conditions this Saturday, and you've practiced for whatever you want to call it, the novelty of floodlights and Sawtill and all that comes with that. So the way that they've strategized for the last couple of weeks, I think is pretty encouraging. And as I say, it is incredibly early days, and I wouldn't be taking any overarching lessons from what we saw against Kildare or what we heard over the last couple of games. But I suppose from what you've seen or what you've heard so far, you couldn't be critical of it.
From what we're really hearing so far, the new faces on the panel seem to really only be Oran Lockery, Sean Kane, Rory O'Connor, Brian Mannion, Shane McGlinchey, Matthew Thompson's obviously in there as well, wasn't involved last year. Other than that, not many new faces in with the senior panel so far at the minute.
Yeah, Brian is injured. Brian Mannion is carrying something over from the back end of last year. I would expect from Brian's club form deserves a league minutes, like deserves serious league minutes. It was inevitable that he would get called in. I think anybody that watched him last year would have seen that he's at this level. Um, so I would say that's a guy now who in that bracket of what I mentioned earlier we haven't seen yet, but I would expect we will see. Like I think it would be only right that he gets a decent exposure as the year comes on. I'd like. Go back to the thing I mentioned earlier, Paul, about serving your apprenticeship. Like, you look at a guy like Conor Farty, right? In the squad, gets injured against Roscommon in a Division 2 league final. Yeah, a Division 2 league final. Doesn't play for that championship, is not part of the squad a year later, comes back in last year and kind of sits his he serves his time. Like he's there, but he's like not getting significant minutes. I think that was disappointing for some people who might have wanted to see what is the actual nature of the hierarchy there. Can we get a bit of competition? As it happened, Conor Gleeson had a great year, and it wasn't an issue. But then suddenly they come back play Clare in the first league game, and with the new rules, and like the first attack, he was up in the other half, so on his left and right foot, and tried a 2 point attempt a couple of minutes later. So there's guys like that who have been in and around who now maybe you might start to see get more exposure. Like it's not the way I look at this stuff is it's not you're not bombing in a new fella from the off and expecting to see him playing in championship. Like there is there's time to be served here. There's a bit of development needs to go into this. It will slowly filter through. So as guys come in, other guys who might have been within that process but didn't necessarily for one reason or the other stick it out will leave. So you're not. I don't think you're replacing 1 to 15 necessarily. Maybe you'll get a bolter, but I think the 1 to 15, the competition there is lads who were there locked in around there last year. What you are replacing is kind of 20 to 30. It's the bulk of that, and see can those guys come in and step filtered up. And if you've got and touch wood, we're not talking about this year, but if you've got an injury crisis again, that then you might start to see those lads come in and make a step up. But I wasn't. There was no stretch by any stretch of imagination. I wasn't expecting Galway to come out and bring in 20 new lads or anything like it. I think by and large you filter in lads who you look at the bulk of the squad, you filter in lads who might strengthen your depth in the extended panel basically, and maybe have to make up for a couple of lads who aren't involved at that stage as well.
With that, like you're talking about filling the 20 to 30, obviously we've seen some players have departed the panel, like the two Kellys, Owen and Paul, Niall Daly, Jack Curran, Rory Cunningham, and Owen Burke, some of the faces to leave from last year. I In one position, you can sort of see why some of those players left with the circumstances. Like it is a massive commitment to go again for another year if you're not getting a look in the previous year.
Yeah, I can see this from everyone's perspective, to be honest. I know it's a really boring answer, and it's like there's not when we have to come down and find a winner and a loser in these situations. But it's an enormous like what those lads give up is an absolutely enormous sacrifice. It is it's no mean thing to be involved in this kind of thing. And if you're not getting like consistent game time or you can't necessarily see the prospect of that, I can see why you're like I'm not going to stick this out. And I don't think it's that big a deal. And I also see from a management perspective why it can be very difficult. Like there was lads who a couple of those lads that you mentioned, if they were like Paul Kelly and Jack Ryan in particular, I think would have absolutely played during that league stretch when there was down serious bodies. Only they were injured as well. So that's very frustrating. And in fairness, I'm Jack Ryan actually played for Milltown at the back end of the league to save him from relegation in the league. That he was one of the lads that was let back to play with his league in the latter stretches of they play club league in the latter stretches of the intercounty league. So they were trying to get that balance right. But that might have been an issue a couple of years earlier where lads were in that kind of bracket where they weren't playing, but they also weren't playing with their clubs. And sure, then you're getting no development, and you actually feel like you're going backwards. So yeah, I can see it from everyone's perspective. To be honest, I know that's a really boring answer, but I think it's a very hard thing to keep lads. That every single intercounty setup is trying to hold on to that cohort of lads who are just on the outer fringes, who are definitely good enough. Like there's no doubt about that. But trying to force their way in is the next rung on the ladder, and for one reason or the other, it hasn't happened yet. And sticking it out is not an easy thing. So, uh, boring answer, but I mean I don't think there's a controversy there. I don't think there's a winner and a loser. I just think it's the reality of the situation.
You made some interesting points there about Conor Flaherty of what he offered Galway going forward in that challenge match against Kildare. And obviously there's a lot being made of keepers at the minute, the 12 versus 11 going forward. Is Conor Flaherty someone that can suit the new rules?
Oh, 1,000,000%. Yeah. Like Conor Farty can play the way he has for the last couple of years just fine in the Euros. There's no if anybody who watched him for UL over the last couple of years, oftentimes Conor Farty is getting involved in the opposition's half. So it wasn't a drastic thing. And the keeper thing, like a league hasn't started yet, and I'm already kind of sick of talking about the keeper thing. I'm not saying by any stretch it's going to be the most dominant team of the league, and that it's that I'm doomsday predicting that we're going to see 12 versus 11 on every single play here. But I also think people dismissing it as not a factor is uh, is a bit crazy, to be honest. Like there's a big thing which is that we don't necessarily know, and which is why I'm not going to come down and say come absolutely cast iron one side or the other. But all the inclinations we've seen so far is that teams put a lot of value in having that outlet, and not every attack is going to be fast. So if that's the reality, they will still get up and contribute to it. A funny thing happened last week, Paul. You've opened a can of worms here now, but Niall Morgan did an interview off the ball. I don't know if you saw it,
Yeah,
and a clip from that went online, and it was like leapt upon by a lot of people who were talking about this 12 versus 11 is not going to be a factor whatsoever. Listen to Niall Morgan, he's talked about Michael Murphy. So then I went to listen to the full interview. And in the same interview, Niall Morgan said that about six times a half he's getting forward into the 12 versus 11. And if they got rid of it, he thinks he'd go away and play soccer, that he wouldn't play Gaelic football anymore. That's one of the best goalkeepers in the country who was saying that. So, so if it's not a factor, but the best goalkeeper in the country is telling you that he'd walk away if it was removed, then maybe do you not think, oh, there might be, it might actually have a bit of an impact, that it's not as minimalist as it happens. But what often happens in these debates is people just have their view on it and they just latch on to just like cherry pick one piece to straighten their argument, even though it might not necessarily be the thing that that person was saying. So uh, park that. I do think that in the current rules, when you watch Conor Farty, what he can do out the field, how accurate his kickouts are, he does have the bomb that Galway, Galway definitely went longer than a lot of opposition teams last year, and he does have the range to do that as well. He can kick it off the ground from a two-pointer now, which is going to be very valuable. I'm talking about frees here.
yeah.
So all that boiled down, yeah, I think a guy like that can absolutely have a role to play in for Galway in whatever Gaelic football is going to look like.
I done like a boil on the podcast after Galway Kildare a few weeks ago, and he was kind of saying it's still hard to know are the new rules and what are they going to suit certain teams and are they not going to suit certain teams. But from obviously you have an in-depth knowledge of the Galway senior football panel. Do you think the new rules suit Galway?
Yeah, I'll answer your question in two parts. Yes, from a manager perspective, and yes, from a player's perspective. From a manager perspective, like I said it to you at the time, I think Dave Morris was a huge asset and a great appointment from a Galway perspective. And the what I would imagine the data that he is operating on, he's going to be in the forefront of the general public, will get a handle on it trends in this in months' time. I'd say people like that will be at the forefront of realizing what's working, what's not, what is the 2 point success rate, how exactly do we need to look at opposition teams who are good at that, what are they doing on their kick out. And that's massive, I think. So I think a guy like that especially will understand before a lot of other people what good, efficient Gaelic football looks like over the coming weeks. From a player perspective, yes, as well, for a bunch of different reasons. So for the obvious ones that they have some very good shooters from range, they have some very good one-on-one defenders. They've already favoured long kickouts, and I mean Galway are monsters around the middle anyway. But also then just banal stuff like in that game, Keane Herning kicked the bomb on top of Matthew Tierney on the edge of the square, and he goes catches a offensive mark, takes on the defender, doesn't come back, doesn't come off. So in that, the new offensive mark rule is you can catch it, you can go for a goal, it comes back, and you take it free. But then Matthew Tierney can come out the field and operate as in midfield or 11, or so you've got a lot of very versatile guys who you don't have to keep the same three up, you don't have to keep your same in midfield, and it makes it. If you're an opposition team and you're saying we know exactly these are our three man markers and they're going to be inside here all the time, and you've got that level of crossing over, I'm in my head I've kind of pictured it's like Eamon O'Shea's Tipperary, like you've got rotating forwards and all this kind of stuff. That I think that is a very tricky thing to set up against. So for all those reasons, I definitely do think that Galway are very well placed to get a hand on this. Now I would say as well, like I wouldn't override it either in that it won't be. It won't be because of the new rules that Galway make a jump on anybody. Regardless of what version of Gaelic football we were watching in 2025, we would have expected them to be there or thereabouts. That's the reality of it. So I think they are well suited to take it, but I don't think it's a game changer for Galway. If we were playing the same Gaelic football we were playing last year, I would have still said the same thing, that I think they're right up there with whoever else is out there.
Just a couple of ones when it comes to the Galway panel. I asked you this question last year, but who's the bolter for you this year?
Um, does Daniel O'Flaherty count as a bolter? Probably not. There's a wing spot back spot there for Daniel O'Flaherty, and everything you're seeing of him for the last. Did I say him last year as well? I might have
No,
actually.
he said Killian O'Carroll last year.
Okay. Well, I stand over that too. I could use him again as well. Um, yeah, that like Daniel Farty for me is looked really good against Kildare. Was coming on in games last year. Was having a massive impact. Like it's kind of it's it might be a 5 minute spell where you're like, geez, Daniel was actually colossal there. I think I said it at the time. He had 15 minutes against Tyrone up and Oma in the league,
Should
and
have
I
got
think
man of the match.
yeah, like without a shadow of a doubt. Uh, I watched the county final back over Christmas there, or the Connacht final, sorry, back over Christmas. Jeez, like his impact in those 5 minutes at the end of the game, to the extent where he actually won the free at, right down the stretch there when they're hunting Mayo down was massive. So I think that Daniel Farty definitely can. More broadly, like those lads I mentioned earlier, like a Sam O'Neill or a Keane Hernan, I think there's absolutely a spot there for them, and I do think they're primed to go and take it. I'd be very curious to see what happens with Conor Farty. Definitely, I mentioned Brian Mannion earlier. I think he will get, or he should get. I don't know if he will. He should get league minutes. And I'd be curious to see how that works out as well, because I think there's inside forward depth needed that probably wasn't there in the All-Ireland final last year when Robert Finlay went off. So there's a spot there to bolster what I was talking about earlier. If you're doing your position rankings, get another couple of guys in there as competition. So there's a whole host of options there, but
Particularly though for a left footer as well.
yeah, for left footer, for a very accurate free taker, for a guy who can operate as out as 11 or inside in the new rules, he should be absolutely primed for it. For the 2 point arc, I mean, he's money. So for all those reasons, I think there's definitely scope to see a bit more of him as the year goes on. But that's like, I think. I think Galway are in a very good place in terms of if you look at some other panels. The first challenging game I covered this year was the Mayo game, and Kevin McStay actually told me after that game they had 17. Like think about that, 17 players playing that day who didn't play championship last year. Now look,
Yeah.
that's a credit to him. There's a lot of kids there who are getting blood, and he's trying to find a couple of bodies. But that's by necessity. Like, make no mistake. They're doing that because there's been a series of retirements over the last couple of years. Just lads stepping away for who knows what. There's some very significant injuries there in Paddy Durkin or Tommy Conroy who aren't going to play in the early stages of the league. So they need to find something. What Galway have in comparison is a luxury. Like no retirements this year, no retirements last year. Other than Peter Cook, very few lads actually have kind of lock start lads stepping away. So that bodes really, really well from a squad's perspective. Like to have that is very encouraging. So I think there's ample number of lads who are capable of putting their hand up over the next couple of weeks.
What player do you think is destined for a big 2025?
Shane Walsh, I think, if reports are accurate about his level of fitness, and it was no secret to anybody last year that he was carrying something significant, and yet still I maintain he had a very efficient year, like not sensational highlight reel stuff, but played a lot of very smart football at crucial times for Galway last year. And I think if he gets a clean run now, the calendar has, not for his perspective, hasn't fallen kindly, but the way it came with Kilmacud getting knocked out and getting a bank in this, Galway obviously aren't going to be rushing him back. I think all bodes well. So I think Shane Walsh could have a really excellent year. I think the same thing is true for Sean Kelly, who's finally looks to be moving, certainly against Kildare anyway, moving reasonably well and got a bit of minutes under his belt in from Mike Cullen, and very curious guy to see what do they do with him in the new rules. Like if he's your full back, are you locking him in one half of the field in which like his whole value as a full back was what he was able to do when he was driving up the pitch. So how do they work that will be an interesting thing to see. So yeah, I think either the two boys are strong candidates to kick on a lot more than what we saw from 2024.
I repeated the All-Ireland final coming up, but for in 2025, what success for Galway?
Oh, an all-round title. Like
Yeah.
that, it's borderline unfair bar to set. But I thought I had a lot of admiration for Park's first interview after this year's All-Ireland final when he turned up for the interprovincial launch and spoke just as typically bluntly as he does about what that had done to him personally, how the regrets that come around that. And the great irony is, I think that is true for a huge portion of the county. Like, I think there's people haunted, public players, managers, coaches, by that loss. And there's only one way you're going to scratch that itch. Like, that's just the reality of it. Well, I was at Galway Convention, and it was, Paul Bellew actually said it during his chairperson's address that what he saw after Donegal game, the high that County's on is like something he's never seen before. What followed after was a bit low, and there's only one answer for that. So I think that's the bar for them. That's the way they'll be thinking internally as well. Like, have no mistake. That's a group who firmly believe they're good enough to go and win on All Ireland this year. Who see absolutely no reason why they shouldn't be the team at the forefront of that. So that's yeah, for me that is the bar. That doesn't mean, to my mind, it doesn't mean that if they don't deliver that the whole thing is immediately a failure. Far from it. Like I'd be fairly adamant about that. Your manner of your performance, all that stuff matters, and there's something to be said for like
Do you think it matters the route they go if they are to get there this year?
uh, so I would have been a bit strong advocate of that's a really interesting question actually. So we still have we have new rules, but we still have the old championship. So and there was scope to change the championship structure. I think the greatest misstep that Gaelic football made in 2024 was not grasping that, because I do think there's going to come a stage where we're watching incredibly one-sided provincial championship games this year, or a group stages
Yeah.
format that people still don't like. They still haven't adapted, and we're thinking, was this not all supposed to be better and more exciting and more entertaining? And look where we're at now. And that's not the fault of the game; it's the fault of the structure of the competition. That's the reality of it. Like, you cannot tell me there's any. If you were to sit down and design this from scratch, there's any competition where your box office, your main event competition, and you be starting and you be saying, Galway, last year, second ranked team in the country, let's send you to New York, the 33rd ranked team. Like, it just, for an opening round, it doesn't make a whole pile of sense. And so, the pole perspective, there's something coming down the tracks there. But I still am adamant. It's not the sole reason they lost the game, but Galway would have been better off getting a result or getting a win in Markievicz Park, not having to go into a preliminary quarterfinal. They got a great win against Monaghan that day. It seemed to not do them any harm, but it would have given a couple of guys a key break, and I think that might have caught them down the straight. So to my mind, and Park said this himself, go in the front door. The main way is still the best way. So go out to defend your Connacht title. No mean thing. Like, a three in a row was a fairly phenomenal achievement. Imagine to go four, but top your group, go avoid a preliminary quarterfinal, go quarterfinal, semi-final, final. I think that's still. Galway came so close last year that I'm reluctant to say it is the absolutely lock way to win an All Ireland, but I do think there's something to be said definitely that it's still the best way.
Just on it then finally, the Galway Armagh game next week, which gets the league underway. How do you see this game? Do you think it's a game Galway go all out for, given Armagh bet them last year in the All Ireland final? It's Pearse Stadium under lights for the first time ever where a Galway team plays.
I I think they'll put more stock in it than they have in coming to their open rounds for the last couple of years. Um, like it didn't do them. It didn't seem to do as much damage, but the loss. Like, they took a tanking in the opening round of the league last year against neighbours Mayo, and I don't think it is the best note to start on. And then you kind of end up chasing. And what you see a lot of teams, especially in the league, burst out of the blocks early, and then maybe do their experiment and see where their panel's at. Might not go gung ho to make a league final, especially might not make to go link gung ho to make a league final if you're in that cohort of teams who's out a week later, which includes
Yeah.
Galway. So there's certain teams who might not have as much interest in, not as much, but it wouldn't be a driving priority to make it to a league final. So I would say, given all of that, there's scope for Galway to go hard early, get a win, put to bed whatever the stock is last year, start the year on a brighter note than they started it last year, and then we might see in the middle rounds of the league a bit of experimentation. You can still win those games, don't get me wrong, but you're just not putting it as your driving ambition is to get over the line there. So, yeah, all that said, new lights in Sawtill, the amount of excitement, how long it took to actually get to this part of the process. Last year's Ireland final is definitely a factor in that too. I would fully expect Galway to go after a victory here.
Yeah, that is Galway Armagh Saturday week, which gets the league underway. That is all we do have time for on this evening's show. Thanks a million to Mars for coming on.